Khaled Hosseini is known internationally as the best-selling author of The Kite Runner and other novels. He currently serves as the Goodwill Ambassador for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and he joins us from Amman in Jordan. Khaled, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure.
What has this experience been like for you? You've walked through these camps in Jordan. There are 700,000 refugees in Jordan. You visited them. What are conditions like?
Difficult. It's very difficult. I think what has happened is to appreciate what's going on here, it's important to appreciate the scale of this crisis. I'm from Afghanistan, and for years Afghanistan had the largest number of refugees in the world. Syria has overtaken that, and at some point before too long we will probably hit the 4 million mark in terms of refugee numbers, and that will be a very sad landmark. 7.6 million Syrians are displaced inside their own country. Essentially 1 out of every 2 Syrian has been uprooted. So this is the biggest and the most serious displacement crisis of our time. So when I went to see the camps, I saw evidence of an expanding crisis, even compared to last year when I was in northern Iraq to visit Syrian refugees. But I also saw a level of services and funding that simply hasn't been able to keep up with the rapid expansion of the crisis. So for instance, I went to Zaatari camp here in Jordan, which is home to 83,000 refugees from Syria. And for the last 3 to 4 months, they've had no electricity. And it's very hot there. It's in a desert. It's very desolate. And Ramadan is coming, and summer is coming with temperatures of 40 degrees Celsius plus, and no electricity, so people not being able to use fans. That's a small example of what I'm talking about, the gap between what refugees need and what is available. And it underlines the importance to make an appeal to the international community to continue to support and increase funding to support those programs that are life-saving and essential to refugees, and to continue to support and invest in these countries like Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, Turkey, and others that have taken in the millions of Syrian refugees over the last few years.
Now, according to United Nations figures, there's something like 2 million children who have been forced to flee their homes in Syria. And that, of course, is not counting the number of children who, as you've just pointed out, have been displaced inside Syria itself. You've called them the lost generation, Syria's lost generation. Is it possible, then, for Syrian culture to be preserved, for these children to be educated, for them to have any kind of a future in that kind of environment?
Well, I think that is a really, really good question, and Syria is at risk of having a lost generation. There's an entire generation of Syrian children that will know nothing but displacement, being uprooted, and going from one refugee camp to another place. And that is not just me making that observation. I saw evidence of that when I went to Zaatari camp 2 days ago. I saw Syrians themselves discussing this very fact. I met a youth group of Syrian refugees who have decided to try to preserve Syrian culture, Syrian music, Syrian tradition for the younger generation by performing music, by writing plays and performing them on stage within the refugee camp to continue to preserve Syrian culture and heritage for the younger generation, which really is at risk of basically falling through the cracks and losing their sense of identity, losing their sense of heritage. And that is one of the many casualties when you have a crisis that is this enormous.
Of course, the influx of Syrian refugees into neighboring countries has been very hard on those countries. Here's what you wrote in the New York Times. You said the neighboring countries, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, are generously doing what they can at great cost to their own economy, social services, and infrastructure. In Lebanon, for instance, Syrian refugees make up nearly 1/4 of the population. You've also talked about international apathy when it comes to how the Syrian refugees are accommodated, how they're treated. Do you have a fear that there might come a point when the door will be shut, when they're just not able to do anymore?
This should not be the burden of a handful of countries. This is an enormous crisis that is putting strains on countries that already have enormous problems of their own. And I think we need to stop thinking as an international community in terms of humanitarian assistance alone, because that's indispensable and life-saving, but it's no longer enough. This war doesn't seem to have an end in sight. So for the foreseeable future, we can expect that we're going to have displacement, and we need to be ready for that. And we need to recognize that countries like Jordan, for instance, where I am currently, no longer can take on this burden on their own, although they've tried very much to do so. The burden is very heavy, and their own services are being strained to their limits. So we need to not only continue the humanitarian assistance, but to actually invest in infrastructure and in development inside these neighboring countries, so that we can help them support the huge number of refugees that are fleeing this terrible war. And also, we need to find a political will somehow to end this war. This suffering of the Syrians cannot go on forever. 7.6 million displaced, 220,000 or plus Syrians have been killed. And there's not going to be a military solution to this war. There's not going to be a humanitarian solution to this war, only a political solution. And I hope that as an international community, we can find a political will to end this war, find a peaceful resolution, a political solution to this war, so that the Syrians can return home and restart their lives.
Earlier in that report we had from our reporter at the scene, we heard that life can be so difficult for some of these refugees in these camps where they are living right now that many of them actually want to risk going back to Syria. Have you heard that as well?
Some Syrians are going back, but I think the Syrians that I met in the refugee camps recognize just how dangerous the situation is in Syria, and many of them are reluctant to go back to Syria because of the level of violence. But certainly there are cases where people return to Syria. And I think it's a reflection of these kind of very risky survival behaviors that certain refugees have to resort to when they simply feel that they don't have any good options left. When you look at the Syrians inside Jordan, most of them don't actually live in camps. 85% of them live in cities. We think in terms of camps when we think of refugees, but most of the Syrian refugees in Jordan, for instance, live in urban areas. And it has some advantages in terms of more freedom of movement and being able to try to find a job, although that's very difficult. But they don't have access to the, for instance, the material goods that people have access to within camps. 2/3 of Syrians that live in urban areas in Jordan live below Jordan poverty line. 1 out of 6 live below abject poverty line. Half of them don't have access to heating. 20% of them don't have a flushing toilet. And so for some, this becomes a very, very difficult solution. And as I said, they resort to kind of these very dangerous and risky survival behavior, one of which is to try to go back to Syria and try to find a place to live there. Some of them, as we know, are also making the very difficult and desperate decision to cross the Mediterranean Sea, which is, really an act of desperation that nobody makes lightly.
When I look at your personal story, your father was an Afghan diplomat. Your family was stationed in Paris when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. And under very different circumstances, of course, your family was granted political asylum here in the United States. How has that experience influenced you, and what does it bring to the job that you're doing right now?
Well, I mean, I would never compare my situation to those of the people that I've seen over the last 3 days, including the people that I saw 2 hours ago here in Amman. But I understand something of the loss of your community. I understand something about the experience of being uprooted and displaced and having to restart life in a foreign country. So the plight of refugees is something that I care about deeply, and is the reason, even though I'm not Syrian, I'm from Afghanistan, but I'm here in Jordan to raise awareness and plead for assistance to Syrian refugees because of my sense of kinship, my sense of solidarity with refugees all over the world.
You've spoken with quite a number of Syrian refugees. Is there one single story, or perhaps some stories that stand out above others?
Oh, goodness. I have so many examples, and we have such limited time. They're really, really extraordinary, extraordinary people. I met a 70-year-old woman today who left Syria on her own, left behind her husband and 9 children, because she didn't want militant groups to threaten her sons and force them to join a militant group by threatening her life, which is a despicable tactic that some militant groups have resorted to. So she removed herself from Syria and actually traveled on her own, a 70-year-old woman, to Jordan, and lives now in a one little room on the outskirts of Amman, and has, at the age of 70, decided to learn how to read and write, takes 2 buses and 2 taxis to get to a community center so she can learn to read, so she can learn to write, because it's a survival tactic for her. So she needs to be able to read the signs on the street. She needs to be able to read the names of her medications on the boxes. And this is a woman that now cleans for herself, cooks for herself. She's 70 years old at the very end of her life, and has made this unbelievable self-sacrifice, an unbelievable act of bravery for the sake of her children. And it's just an example of the incredible stories of courage and will and resourcefulness that I've seen over and over again when I've talked to Syrian refugees here in Jordan.